Good afternoon. I'm not going to be moving around too much because there's not a lot of room to move. If I go too far this way, I'm going to fall, and too far this way, you can't see the slides. So I thought the first thing I should do is come up here and go, well, good afternoon. Just bear with me. I'll get the slides up and we'll get started. All right, I'm used to, that would have been quicker. I've got a Mac. When you do PC, it's a little slower. Sorry, it's a Mac thing. I'll just mention before we get started, everybody can hear me okay? All right. I am taping this, okay? It's for my use only, and you're not on this. Don't worry. The worst case is back of the head, but I don't even think we have that. So, and I'll offer this to you. If after today you've enjoyed it so much that you want to copy the recording, because you're here, I'm happy to provide it to you. Just reach out. My business card will be up here. You can email me, and I'm happy to send it to you to share it with you. Okay? Fair enough? Perfect. So I titled this, How to Get More Than What You're Worth, because from my travels around the world, and I look at negotiations really beyond what's happening in the supply chain profession. I look at them all over. I look at them from a union and labor standpoint. Again, supply chain between managers and their employees. Everybody's negotiating all the time. And negotiations really comes down to a couple key ingredients. Blank screen. First of all, it's a mixture of art and science with, I think, a little sprinkle of luck. I don't know about you, but I've gone into a lot of negotiations and I've come away with sometimes a very successful outcome, sometimes a little better than what I thought I might have found, because there's been a little bit of luck in there that's played to my part. Now, I think there's something below that. We'll dissect that a little bit further and talk about it. But, you know, I think the problem is that nobody's really quite sure what combination of art and science will get them to their desired outcome, right? So that's what I want to talk about today. Now, I'm going to start with something that is a true story. About a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I went out with my wife to buy some fertilizer. It was springtime, going to get some fertilizer. Went to a local nursery, went in the back, and we had seen a flyer where fertilizer was on sale. And I know, coming from Saskatchewan, you guys probably just grab it out of the fields, right, or something, right? But nonetheless, I'm going to buy this stuff. It's on sale. I go, and there's 3 stacks of fertilizer, okay? And there's 2 pricing signs, and they're kind of between the stacks, so it's hard to tell which one's for which stack. So I find the fertilizer I want, which is the springtime fertilizer. The sign is kind of there for the sale. I had perfect. Load up the cart, a whole bunch of them. I had like 8 bags. Go up to the front, go to pay. She rings it through. It's about twice as much money as I thought it was going to be. So what happened was, you know, let's say I thought it was going to be 35 bucks or 50 bucks. Let's say $50. And she rings it in, it's going to be $95. So what I'm doing at the time when she says this is I'm thinking about what she's saying. So I'm thinking, hold on. I thought this was $50 for this. I did the math, but there was 2 signs and 3 stacks. Did I look at the wrong stack? I misjudged something. So this is what's going through my head, and it takes a few minutes to think this through. From her perspective, when she said to me, it'll be $95, this is what she saw from me. So do you feel that moment, probably even for you, where it goes beyond comfortable, and you're like, oh, it's a little awkward. So what happened was, she kind of cut my thoughts off, and she said, you know what, it's fine. I'll just change the price. It's okay. We'll just change it. We'll give it to you for $50. Oh, okay. Sounds good. I looked at my wife. I'm like, hey, look at that. Negotiator, right? So I realized that that's part of the art of negotiations, because one of the, I've got about 100 different points and tips on negotiations, from the complex to the simple. But one of them is this, that when we are silent, everybody's uncomfortable with silence. And I say this in general terms, he who steps into the silence first says the most awkward things, and usually to their detriment. So when you think about negotiations, we have to think about all of these different attributes of our personality, of the personality of the other person, the environment, the situation. But what we often do is we just look at what we believe are the facts, we prepare, and we go for it, right? I mean, we were taught that way. You know, I always think about the book Getting to Yes. Both parties come to a yes. I don't want both parties. I want yes. I don't want them to have yes. So I always tell people that doesn't make any sense to me, because I come from a profession where I negotiated. And if I always walked into my boss's office and said, well, we both walked away really happy, that's not going to fly. So I want to kind of go through specifically 4 principles with you today. I think you'll find really ring true. I don't think I'm going to blow your socks off with some new ideas, but I think what I'll do is give you a structure and a framework that you can think through and apply that will help you in the future, okay? So I want to start with, it's kind of a bouncy microphone. I want to start with this. Everybody do you have a piece of paper, pad, and pen at your table there? I'm going to put you to work. It's like shortly after 1, right? So this is the time everybody had a good lunch and they started a good time. So here's what we're going to do. On the piece of paper, I want you to put 3 columns. And don't write what's on here. I'll walk you through this. So put 3 vertical columns, okay? And on the left column, thinking about your negotiations. So think about your company, your role, the types of negotiations you're in. I want you to list, just take a minute and list your specific qualifications and experience that make you an expert in negotiating. Okay, so think about your environment, your workplace, your situation. What are your qualifications and experience? Could be courses you've taken, designations you've had, different positions you've worked in. Just take a minute and jot down a few ideas. Is that a bell? No, I'm hearing bells. If I pass out, you know what's going on. All right, so next what I want you to do is in that middle column, I want you to think about the transfer mechanism. Now let me explain that, because that's the part some people get a little confused with. The transfer mechanism is, what do you use to take your skills and experience and apply them? So you could say it's my job title. It's the company I work in. It's where I hold my negotiations. It could be anything at all, right? So how do you take your experience and your skills and apply them to your negotiations? What's those transfer skills? So just take a minute and jot down a couple points here that stand out for you. All right. In the last column on the far right, I want you, again, thinking about your environment, your role. I want you to think about what are the typical results you're trying to achieve through negotiations. And think bigger picture. Don't just say reduced price, right? It might be managed budget, might be the bigger picture, right? You're trying to get a certain number of prices down to fit within a budget. So what are those end results you're trying to achieve when you're negotiating? Just take a few minutes and write a few points down. Or think about it if you don't want to write it down. All right, so here's something I want to kind of counter before we start to talk about this today. If you think about negotiations, think about preparing for negotiations, okay? And I'm not going to say this is you, but what most people do is they think when they're going into a negotiation, they have the confidence of their skills and their experiences. I've done this before. I've dealt with this person before. I've been in this situation before. I just did a course on getting to yes, and we're going to hug at the end of this. Whatever it is, right? Thinking about that, and it's giving you confidence to go into the situation. And then the next thing you're thinking about is, okay, so how am I going to make this happen? Or am I going to sit here in this chair or over there in that chair? If I'm having 2 people, who's good cop, bad cop? We should talk that through, right? At what point am I going to be aggressive? What point am I going to back off? So you're thinking about your transfer mechanisms. But we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the far right column, right? We have a mission that we're on to achieve, and we kind of know in general terms what we want to achieve, but we're not thinking about the bigger picture. When you're preparing for negotiations, you want to start at the far right. And I would suggest most times you don't even need to work too far to the left. What are the results you want to achieve for your role, for your business, for your company, whatever it is? And the reason you want to do that is because speed is of the essence in negotiations, right? Think about the laws of atrophy, it suggests that nothing stands still. Over time, everything diminishes. So if you're going into, think about union labor negotiations, right? What happens? Well, they start with, they pick the most senior people have negotiated before, right? That typically go into the negotiations on either side of the fence because they've got the experience, the knowledge. And then they say, okay, well, who's going to take what position? Who's going to suggest what point? Where are we going to hold this thing? What side of the table are we going to sit on? And at the end of it, they're not really thinking about collectively what they could get to as a result. They're thinking about it individually. And then they wonder why they buck heads. And what happens is over time, at the end of the negotiations a lot of times, it takes weeks, if not months, to come to a conclusion. And often it's not the best conclusion for either party. So speed, when we're negotiating, is of the essence. And if you start with thinking about the results and the outcomes you want to achieve, next thing you know, you're working with speed and you're going to achieve faster results. So I want to walk through, with that in mind, I want to walk through 4 different principles with you to kind of give you a feel for a framework you can use and apply. So I'm going to start with, I think I have a slide even for this one. By the way, the slides are printed off. I think are they handed out? Everybody's got a copy of the slides. Again, they're pretty small. I've got additional slides to this with additional words and such. So if you want a copy, feel free afterwards. You can contact me. I'm happy to send them along to you. Oh, there we go. See that? Okay, so first I want to touch on this, okay? So when we're thinking about, just before Principle 1, if we think about for a second, in Principle 1, what I'm suggesting to you is the results you achieve in negotiations really rely on your ability to influence and persuade others. It really comes back to influence and persuasion. Before I explain that, let me just show you what I'm talking about here in this double axis chart. If you think about influence, influence is really indirect, right? So politicians influence you. You may never meet them, but they're doing everything they can to influence you to vote for them through media, TV, interviews, you name it, right? Persuasion, on the other hand, is very direct. It's your ability to listen and use language to try and convince the other person in the moment of what they need to do. So that's differentiating the two. If you think about for a second relative to influence, some ways you can build influence are really to try and build your credibility, right? Build repute outside of the negotiation. So with your suppliers, for example, with others around you, if you manage a team of people, how can you build that reputation so that there's indirect influence? So they know your expectations and where you're likely going to be heading. And one of the most important things about influence in regards to negotiations you can do is create perceived expertise. You know what perceived expertise is? It's when you walk into a situation and you believe, consciously or subconsciously, that that other person is going to be really good at whatever it is they're doing. Think about the last time you went into a situation, let's say a negotiation, and somebody told you, wow, well, good luck, you know, they're a tough negotiator. I had to deal with them once. Wow, kicked my butt, right? So you go into that situation thinking that. And even though you might prepare well because you know, okay, well, I'm a little bit nervous, when you're in the moment, your emotions take over. You get nervous. You react, you step into silence with silly things like, so, how long you been that tall, right? And nobody cares. So perceived expertise is something you can create, and it helps you. The relationships you have with your team, with your suppliers, with people at work is perceived expertise that you can build, and they know how to interact with you, and they understand how you will negotiate with them. So, and actually, before I explain this, it brings to mind another story I want to tell you. Oh, can somebody get that? Another story I want to tell you. I took a job, first job in procurement. Well, I've been in this 20 years, so I started when I was 10, right? So I took this job, and it was the strangest interview I've ever had. So I applied, and the guy that was going to hire me met me at a Kelsey's for dinner with the HR manager. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go in and meet. So I'm prepared. I went to, was it Monster, studied the questions for interviews. I'm ready. I go in, sit down, have dinner. HR guys asking me these questions like, you know, where did you go to high school? What did you major in high school? And I didn't major in anything. I majored in hanging out, right? And then, you know, what made you want to go to college? You know, what did you take in college? And I'd taken the same darn course as the guy who was hiring me. That's how he found out about me. So it was just the strangest interview, and finally, near the end of dinner, he turns to my future boss, and he says, hey, Frank, do you have any questions for Shawn? And Frank says, you've never really done procurement before. And I said, no. He said, can you do this? I said, yeah. He's okay. He just went back to eating. And I'm not making this up. So I thought, okay. So I left, not really sure what had just happened. Did I have the job or not? So about a week later, I get a call. HR manager wants me to go into the facility and meet with him and meet with one of the plant managers. I was going to be juggling amongst various facilities. I said, okay. I go in and sit down with the plant manager, have a conversation, and he had the tough questions. And I hadn't prepared for him. right? Because I thought he wasn't part of the interview. And he was, you haven't done this before. How do you think you're ever going to achieve this? Here's the circumstance we had. How would you fix this? And I walked away going, wow, that did not go well, okay? So the HR manager now says, come on into the boardroom, I want to talk to you. It's about 6 o'clock, nobody's there. Plant manager leaves, just me and the HR manager, excuse me. We sit down in the room, puts his jacket down. He says, so what do you think? I said, about what? He said, well, about the job. I said, well, it seems like a good job, that's why I applied. He says, no, are you interested in the job? I said, okay. He says, well, we're thinking X for a salary. I said, well, I was hoping for a little bit higher. He said, how about Y? And I said, okay. He says, great, I'll send the paperwork off to you next week. Look forward to working with you. And he left. I went into that second interview thinking the first interview was such a pushover. Right? I studied and studied. I'm thinking, wow, the toughies are coming. And I didn't expect them to come from the plant manager. And the HR manager just, I guess he was consistent anyways with his questioning. So if you think about the idea of perceived expertise, that's what I was acting on. He was an HR manager. He does this all the time, or so I thought. So I expected he would have the tough questions, and he would analyze me to death, do personality scoring, tell me I'm a green ITB, high D, whatever it is, right? And he had nothing for me at all. I was operating on perceived expertise. And because I did that, I wasn't prepared. I could have said, I want a salary of Z. And looking back, he would have said, okay. And I didn't do it. I lost out on the opportunity. My negotiations were not as strong as they could because I was working on that perceived expertise. So that's what I mean. That's an example of perceived expertise. And I think if you think about people you interact with, you probably experienced that at some point. So the other portion of this is persuasion, right? So that's the more direct, the in the moment. And when you're being persuasive, it starts with listening. You know, I tell people all the time, I heard this once and I'll never forget it, probably because I do this backwards, but I've heard that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Right? The problem is we usually use them backwards, probably myself included. So when you're trying to be persuasive, you have to really listen. You have to be in the moment because the information you're getting is an information you can restructure and use in your language and your discussions back. Right? Negotiations is about reaching common ground, but it might be a common ground that's more desirable to you than the other person. Right? So when you can build persuasiveness through a couple different ways. If you think about preparing for the negotiation, preparing for the discussion. What are my outcomes? We talked about that earlier. What might the other person's outcomes be? How might I direct these discussions to try and get to my outcome but bring them along, right? Because it's all about trying to put them in a frame, and I'll talk about that shortly. I want to use facts and examples. Persuasion means that I can support my points, that you have no reason to question what I'm saying. So bring facts, bring other people into it if you have to. Right? But all of these things help you build your persuasiveness, which is in the moment when you're negotiating. The last point I want to make, if you're truly being persuasive, is you want to try and drive a sense of urgency because it goes back to that speed. If I can get a deal quicker and I'm in control and being persuasive, it's probably going to be better for both of us in the long run because we can drag this thing out and waste our time, right? And you know, if anything, I have a couple stories. But early on in life, I sold vehicles. And what happened was, oh, my ears just popped. I flew in, so if you can't hear me, I can't hear myself. I sold trucks for a period of time, GMC, Chevrolet trucks when I was really young. And it's kind of funny, I don't know if you know this or not, but you know the special editions that come out with the stickers and stuff? I think that back then they had some Sierra edition or some special edition truck. But here's what happened. The trucks are lined up in front, different colors, different options. And this big package, this big box comes into the sales manager's office, and he calls us in. He says, we're making these Sierra editions today. I said, what are you talking about? He opens up the box, and there's just stickers, Sierra stickers. One for the dash, one for the tailgate, one for each side that goes underneath the logo. And he says, we got to go, I'll show you exactly where they go. So we go, and they had to be just perfect. They had a diagram. It came right from GM as to exactly where to put them. And I'm going to put this up on the web, so GM's probably going to sue me. But nonetheless, so put these stickers on. And here's what happened. We put the stickers on about a Thursday, and that weekend's paper, here is this big splash page, right, from General Motors. Hey, get out, get the new Sierra edition. It's got all these features. And the one thing that was common between all the trucks is just their features. They all had power windows. They all were four-wheel drive. They all had, it was that kind of idea. But other than that, before then, they were just trucks sitting on the lot, right? So the paper, the ad was being influential because people read that, go, wow, good pricing. I'm looking for those features. Whoa, it's a Sierra edition. I got to go look at this, right? And people come in, then it was up to us to be persuasive. You know, you could look at this truck, but over here we have this Sierra edition, right? Put the stickers on with, I mean, no, it's a really good, right? So you can see in that example, that's in the sales world, they're doing that all the time. Right? But you need to apply the same thing in your negotiations because negotiations is like selling. You're trying to sell your position and get the other person convinced to come along with you. So just to kind of finalize the point on influence and persuasion, I just want to kind of show how this works, okay? So if you think about it, if you were high on persuasion, okay, and look at this as a scale, right? So the far right, you're high on persuasion, but if you were low in influence, you see where it says timing and positioning? See how the chart works? So if you have a lot of persuasion power in the moment, you're there, you're doing it, right? You can make it happen, but influence-wise, they don't really know you. They don't really know much about your credibility. Then you want to focus on your timing and positioning. What am I going to say and when's the right time to say it? Because I don't want to push this thing to the end without having taken time to build up some credibility and influence during the discussion. Now, on the other side, if I have a high degree of influence, top here, but a low degree of persuasion on the left, top left corner, I want to focus on my expertise in language. So I've already got a reputation. I want to demonstrate that in the language that I'm using, that I do know what I'm talking about, I do have expertise in this area. On the bottom, if I have very little influence and very little persuasiveness or persuasion, I might want to withdraw. I want to step away from negotiations, say, okay, I got to bring somebody else in, I got to do more research, this isn't working. On the top right, you've got high influence, high persuasion. You should be able to dominate in that negotiation. It should be yours. And I think if you think about negotiations where you've really knocked it out of the park, both those factors were at play, right? So that brings me then to principle number 2. Success in negotiations is really all about preparation. It truly is. And I know, to hear that, you think, Shawn, I've heard that before, I don't have time. And that's fine. But preparation doesn't have to mean an hour and a half. It doesn't have to be a meeting with a whole bunch of people. It can be 2 minutes. But let me tell you some things you can use to prepare, quite simply. First of all, you want to think about your minimum and maximum objectives of that negotiation, right? So, and that might only take you 2 minutes, it might take you 20, but you want to think about what do I want to achieve at the low level and the high level coming out of this negotiation, because that tells you your threshold, right? You want to ask yourself questions like, what am I willing to accept as a minimum objective here? Meaning if it's below that, I'm walking. I'm out, it's not going to happen, right? I'm going to walk away. On the flip side, what do I want as a maximum objective? And you know why that's important? Because if you don't prepare for success, you're not going to notice it or realize it when it's right in front of you. And then, how can I use questions to try and direct this towards my objectives? If we get off track, I now have a barrier. How do I keep it within those barriers, within that frame that I want to achieve? And when I say to people about, you really need to prepare for negotiations, they always say, yes, Shawn, I know. I got to prepare just in case something doesn't go as planned. That's true. But you also have to prepare in case things go as planned. Because if you can get a better outcome, why wouldn't you try? But oftentimes we don't think about things going really well, and we get there and we flub it up. We miss the opportunity because it's all about timing. When I bought my first car, I came out of college. I've been driving a Honda Civic. Who here drove a Honda Civic to college or school? Yeah. A lot less than I thought. Okay. I always tried to convince myself there was more than just me driving a Honda Civic. Anyways, so I drove this car to college. Second year of a 3-year program, I really wanted to buy a new Mazda pickup. I was just dying for it. Went to the dealer, test drove it, big mistake. Thought I was going to buy it, got talked out of it by my logical parents. Drove the Honda for another year, but at the end of that year, boy, I don't even know if I had a job, I don't remember, but I went and bought that truck, right? So my dad said, I'm not going with you, you can do this yourself, I'll give you some advice. The price is the price. Dealerships, they've already discounted, you gotta go for features, right? Mud flaps, floor mats, tonneau cover, right? You gotta go for those things because you're not gonna adjust the price. So I said, okay, great, I'm ready. I go in the dealership, I find the truck I want, he's got it in the lot. So I sit down for the negotiation, I said to him, okay, before we make any deal here, I'm telling you right now, it's got to have a bed liner, and I want the windows tinted. That's it. If that's not going to happen, no deal. That's like, what, $230? Really, right? He says, well, good news, I can do that for you. That's not a problem. We got a window tinter here. We got the box liners in stock, not an issue. And in fact, there's a program on right now. If you sign up today or by Saturday or whatever it was, it's another $1,000 off. I thought, yes, I negotiated the heck out of him, right? So that was until about a month and a half later. A friend of mine, I'll still recall his name, was Pete. Pete bought the same truck, got $3,000 off the price, mud flaps, floor mats, tonneau cover, box liner, tinted windows. Same truck. Didn't do such a great job. So you have to make sure you're thinking minimum and maximum. I wasn't thinking maximum. In that case, if he was flexible in the maximum, I should have gone for more, but I didn't because I never thought about it. I was too worried about just getting the minimum. I got to get something out of this, right? And that's how we often approach our negotiations. Next, you want to think about what are some possible responses to the other party's points, right? So what might they say to me and how am I going to respond? That's part of preparation. And sometimes you spend more time on that than you do preparing for your own responses. What directions might that discussion take? How will I direct the discussions if they head in that manner? And then lastly, you want to think about how to best position your needs while considering what's in the other person's best interest. Okay, and we've heard that before. And people say to me, Shawn, how do I put stuff in the other person's best interest? Right? It's near impossible. And I'll tell you the same I tell them, that's wrong. The last time you wanted to do something and it required the agreement of your spouse or significant other, you spent a lot of time preparing your language and your approach. I travel a lot, away from home a lot, 2 small boys at home, so my wife appreciates when I get home, and the first words she says to me are, "You're up," right? So a weekend comes, I want to go away with some friends. I really got to think this through. So I use phrasing such as, "Dear, I think when I come home on weekends, sometimes it's a burden, because now you really have to take care of 3 boys instead of 2. And to help you out, what I'm going to do next Saturday is I'm going to take the day away, and I'm going to let you be with the boys, spend some quality time. But on Sunday, I want you to take the day and do whatever you want." Right? We often give more thought to those kind of discussions than we do to negotiations we go into, right? Because there's more on the line, really. So preparation is key. And think about lawyers. Lawyers spend more time preparing for what the other party will ask their person, their what do you call them? Representative? Their plaintiff? Client? Client. There you go. Plaintiff. I hear that dun, 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 dun in the background. Anyways, so they spend a lot of time thinking through what the other questions are going to be. And they prepare for those, probably more so than they do their own position, because they know if they can really take what's coming at them and turn that around and put it in their client's best interest, in their client's light, it's going to sway the jury. And that's what you're trying to do in negotiations. The third point I want to bring to you is the art side, which is language. It's not as much what you say, it truly is how you say it. Think about the example I just gave you with my wife. I said the same. I could have said the same thing, "Honey, I'm gone next weekend," or "I won't be here Saturday." That wouldn't have flown. In fact, the other way didn't fly either. But I tried, right? So you want to, first of all, it comes back to the same kind of things. Think about examples, metaphors, stories that you can use that help support your position, right? Because you have to make yourself look credible. Secondly, how you use your language, deciding when do I speak and what do I say. I often find when I'm finished a negotiation and I reflect on it that sometimes it's like playing euchre. If I feel I've got a good hand and I've sat there for some time thinking through the hand and how I could play the hand, if it is a good hand, I'll slap down those good cards right out of the gate. I'm the person most of you hate because I'm like, look, I'm taking your I got the 3, I got the 2 bowers, you know, and I'm out. So, you know, sometimes I play it that way. Other times, if I don't feel as comfortable or I'm not sure of the other person, I sit back and I'm quiet and I listen. And I spend a lot of time listening until I feel more comfortable or I take it to the next level. So you want to think about that preparation time, but you also want to be strategic in how you use your language. You don't just want to go in with a list of things to say and do. You have to be in the moment, you have to be listening, and you have to be flexible and strategic about what you're going to say and when you're going to say it. And then lastly, you want to look for those connecting threads. If you have spent even a few minutes thinking through what you want to achieve, okay, if you're clear on what you want to achieve, your minimum and maximum objectives, what tends to happen is when your other, I'll call them your opponent, says something, so you grab a hold of it. And you ding, a light goes off, and you're like, you know, that's a really good point, Nicole. I think If we did that, you know, and suddenly you're off on a tangent that supports yourself. So if you're in the moment listening and you've thought through, you pick up on those cues, and that's helpful to you in negotiations. And that, again, comes back to the language you use and how you position. Some of you may have heard this before, but I'm going to say it again because I think it proves a point, and it is true. So I mentioned earlier I travel a lot, and I stay at hotels at least 2 to 3 days a week, every week. I get food sickness about once every 6 months. That seems to be my life. So I went to a hotel. I was going to be there for a week. So what happens, and I know the guys are going to groan, but what happens if you stay in a hotel, it's dry, and the shampoo and soap is crap, right? Anybody stayed in a hotel, you know that. So that's fine, but by the end of the week, you know, I've got eczema everywhere, right? Dandruff, you name it. I'm dry as a bone, right? So I was going to stay a week. I thought, you know what, I'm going to bring my own soap, but for ease, because you can't take liquids at the border, I was just going to drink bar soap. So I grabbed a 15-year-old bar soap that I've been kicking around of Zest, took it with me, right, going on a trip. I get to the hotel, check in, and they've got the typical. There's a bar soap at the sink, bar soap in the shower, and there's a bar, like an extra bar soap in a little basket next to the sink. I said, okay, take the 2 bars of soap, sink and shower, put them in the basket, put up my Zest, away I go. Next morning I get up, gone for the day. So I'm thinking people are going to pick up on the fact that I stacked the soap. I come back that night, there's 3 bars of soap in the basket, there's my Zest, next to it, another new bar of soap, and another new bar of soap in the shower. Okay, so I took the 2 extra bars of soap, I put them in the basket, now there's 5. I called down the front desk, I said, the maid dropped off extra soap, I don't need it, I have my own soap, thank you very much, don't need more soap. They said, no problem, sorry for the inconvenience, we'll take care of it. I said, great. Go away the next day, come back that night. So there's 5 bars of soap, right, in the basket. And there's my bar soap. There's another little bar of soap next to it, and another bar of soap in the shower. Now I have 7 bars of soap. I picked 2 bars of soap up, put them in the basket, called down the front desk. I said, I called down last night about these bars of soap. I don't need them. I'd really appreciate it if somebody could just take the bars of soap away, because it seems to be confusing whoever's coming in here, right? They said, you know what, do me a favor, call the head maid's desk, leave a message with her, that way it gets right to her, it won't get skewed because I'm on nights, it might, you know, fair enough. So I call, leave a message. It's room 215, Mr. Casemore, you keep dropping off bars of soap, I don't need them, I have my own. Appreciate if you could pick up the soap, I don't need it, you probably do. I've got my own, I'm good, no more soap, thank you very much. Next day, leave, come back that night, the soap's gone, right? There's no 5 bars, there's no new bars. And my Zest is gone too. So I called down the front desk. I said, I have a problem. I called 2 days ago and wanted you to stop dropping off soaps. You didn't. So I called the maids off, head maid last night, left a message, take the bar of soap away. She took all the soap away. And he said, well, sir, isn't that what you wanted? I said, no, you took my soap away. So I have no soap. She said, well, come on down. We'll give you another bar of soap. I said, great. Took the bar of soap. Go back up. And when I was down at the front desk, I asked to speak to a manager. I explained the situation. I said, I want my soap back. I don't want to use this crappy dry soap you're giving me. I got a bar of Zest. It traveled a long way to be here with me, right? It's the only thing I brought from home, really, other than my clothes. I'd like it back. Appreciate if you, and they said, well, sir, we'll talk to the head maid. We'll take care of it. Apologize for the inconvenience. I said, great. Come back the next day. Last night there. About 10 bars of soap. They're sitting there. And there's a letter from the head maid. Dear Mr. Casemore, you asked us to remove the soap from your room, which we quickly did. Then you wanted all the soap returned to your room, which we've done. I apologize for any inconvenience, but I'm really not sure what you want from us. Hope your stay gets better. Signed, the head maid. Language is everything, and so is our interpretation of it. So when we think about language, we also have to think about the words we're using, the tone we're using, and are we being clear? You know, number 1 tip that I'm sure you use and I always use is after any important discussion, negotiations included, I followed up with a written email, right? Because I want to get stuff documented down, and I want to be the one to document it, sometimes strategically, right? So that we were prepared to go the next step, and there was no lack of clarity around what we just agreed upon and what's the next step. So language is everything. Communication is absolutely everything, especially in how you use it. And you want to make sure in negotiations you're being clear. There's nothing wrong in a negotiation if you pick up from the other person when you say something and they don't seem to be, you know, they're looking at you like, I say, does that make sense? Right? Did what I just say make sense to you? Do you have any questions, comments, anything to add? Because that's the only way I can get it out. And if by chance somebody comes back later and said, you know, that didn't make sense to me, I'll say, well, hold on. I asked for clarity. I brought that about. You decide not to take advantage of it. So I'm doing everything I can to really make sure the communication and the language is clear. Number 4. When you're in a negotiation, I kind of want to premise this first, and you hear people say things and you start to feel like this isn't going well, right? Those are typically objections, right, that you're hearing. I want to debunk the idea that objections are immovable objects. They're things that you can't overcome, because that's false. Objections are signs of interest. Objections are signs you're reaching some sort of agreement. Because if I'm in a negotiation and the other person has nothing to say, then they're going to leave, and it's over. But if they say that's not going to work because of this, or because of that, or that price is too low, that offer's not acceptable, at least I see they're engaged, they're interested, and we're maybe getting somewhere. So objections are clear signs and a gauge you can use to show you where you're going, where you're heading in the negotiation. So let me just give you a couple examples of those. First of all, objections, there's typically only 3. First is investment, right? So meaning that's not enough, it's too much, right? Anything around investment, return, that's typical one objection you'll hear. The second one is time. It's not soon enough, it's too soon, it's going to take too long, right? And the third is trust. And trust doesn't come out so clearly. That's where there's a relationship issue. But again, trust is often masked in other ways. People suggest other objections, and you're thinking it's one thing when actually they just don't trust what you're saying. They don't trust you're going to do what you say you're going to do. Apologize for drinking so much. I've been staying in a hotel. It's really dry. I did not wash my mouth out with soap. Yeah, I do a lot of work in strategy. So I went in to see a client, and before we actually did this strategy session, they said, you know, I want you to meet some of our senior managers. I said, okay, no problem. I showed up, and he took me and introduced me to one of the VPs, sat down, and he said, how you doing? I said, great. He said, if I could be just straight up with you, I got a question for you right out of the gate. And I said, sure. He said, I'm curious how somebody who started their career in supply chain management, moved into project management, is now doing business planning. So I'm thinking, okay, this is some sort of objection, right? Because we really haven't signed a deal to go ahead. He has a serious concern, it seemed. So how am I going to address this? Now, luckily, I had thought this through. What if I'm challenged about my background? Because that could happen. So I said to him, well, let me explain. I've really spent enough time in the bowels of the organization to know how it ticks. I spent time in warehouse management, procurement, contract management, operations management, project management, you name it. If it's got management in the end of it, I've been there. I've done that, right? So I said what happened is when I launched my own practice, companies were asking me to help them execute on their strategy. And eventually one day somebody said, hey, you seem to be able to help us execute well. Can you help us formulate one? Because if we can formulate a successful strategy and execute on it, we're beating out, I think it's what, 70% of executions fail of strategy. So we're beating out our competition. So I did that once, I did it again, and here we are today. That's basically the explanation I gave him. You know what his response was? That's great. I think you're on the mark. I think that's a fantastic background to have. I thought, holy cow, right? Perceived expertise. I thought this was a big objection. He was actually, it was quite the opposite. So if I hadn't been prepared for that kind of response, right, I kind of closed the deal right there. Because even if he was on the fence with that, I was able to address it clearly to his satisfaction. There was no further objection. But the objection told me we're on to something. It was a sign of interest. So I knew if I give him the time of day and explain this clearly, it's going to mean something. Objections also help us gauge the strength of our negotiation. I mean, if you come out and you've been negotiating and somebody says you got 25 things on a list that they're not happy with, maybe your position isn't so strong. Maybe you have more work to do, more discussions to have. On the other hand, if it's just a couple objections, we're getting close. And the last part of an objection is you can really pick up on them by watching people's body language and listening to their voice tone. You can pick up on how they move their eyes, right? If you're negotiating with somebody and they go, well, you know something's coming, right? So if you're in the moment, and that's the most difficult part. If you walk away today and you try and really prepare for negotiations, this is what you'll look like me in the fertilizer store, right? You be, okay, what's step one? Okay, I got it. Yeah, okay, hold on, I'll just write with it. I gotta think this through, right? What you have to do is try and stay in the moment. And if you think through and prepare enough, then whoops, that was my watch. If you think, I don't know the time now. If you think through, right, and prepare enough, then when objections mount, you're prepared for them. You address them quickly, speed is of the essence, and you move on. And there's no more issue. And you're not panicking thinking, uh-oh, this is an objection, something's going wrong, right? I was asked, when I was in procurement, I was asked by a project manager to come in and facilitate, if you will, mediate is a better word, a meeting he had with a supplier. He had gone to them for an estimate about 1 year prior. It was a big project, multi-million-dollar project. He had got an estimate, he had got budget approval, and he had said, okay, now Mr. Supplier, you work with these people to finalize the details, and he went about his business. A year later, he's ready to go, details have been worked out, they say, here's our final estimate, and it's $1 million more than what they originally estimated. So he hit the roof, right? Because you can imagine he's got to go back and ask for $1 million more, right? That's not good. So he wanted me to come in because his feeling was this supplier, using more polite words, was not being friendly. So I said, okay, no problem, I'll sit in. So I had a look, and to be honest with you, it was all Greek to me, right? It was all technical stuff and I was lazy. I didn't want to read it. So I just said to them, going into the meeting, I said, do me a favor, Mr. Project Manager, Mr. Project Tech, don't say anything until I look at you or point at you or ask you to. I know that sounds weird, but I knew they were upset. They were working on emotions, and it was just going to go that direction if they started talking. So then the supplier shows up. He's got his chief engineer in hand and multiple binders. And I knew right then and there, this was not only their problem. So to summarize what happened in that meeting, the end result is that all of the year that happened, the project manager's company had been making changes, improvements, updates, and they hadn't told him. So the $1 million was justified based on what his own people had said. He just didn't know about it. But because of the price difference, although the supplier tried to explain it, he was working from emotion, wasn't thinking clearly. So the supplier came clear in the meeting that they really just wanted to get paid for something. They'd spent a year, they hadn't collected a dime. So that was their objection. They didn't say it out front, but they were saying stuff like, we need to bring this to some sort of resolution. We put a lot of work into this. So clearly investment's an issue. So what we did is we went back, we identified some areas with the project manager where we felt they could reduce cost, make some changes back to the original design without hurting anything that would yield some price reduction. And we said to them, you know what, and this is what I brought to the table, I said, if you do this, and you can meet this range, right, in our original discussions, I'll have a PO for you. We'll make it happen. So they came back with a counteroffer and said, we will do these things for this price, and it was very close to the original price, but you have to have a PO to us on Friday. And this was a Tuesday. Now you think, big deal, right? It was a big deal. In this organization, typical PO, average lead time at his study was about 28 days. So 4 days was a big thing, especially for a multi-million-dollar project. But we made it happen, right? All hands on deck. I ran that thing around like I was babysitting it, and we made it happen. We got the savings. But my point is this, that in that meeting, had that project manager tried to push that to resolution, we did it in one meeting. It lasted no more than an hour. The supplier was happy. They met with me after. They thanked me. The project manager was happy. And all I did was went in and recognize what the objection is, recognize that both parties wanted to come together. There was just a gap. Let's address the gap and move on. It really was simple. And I'm sure you do that every single day. That's negotiations. I didn't say a lot. I didn't have a lot of expertise, but I did have some influence, if you go back to the earlier slide, because the project manager said, I'm bringing Shawn in. Shawn's an expert in negotiations, right? And so the suppliers coming, oh, better be prepared. That's why all the binders came. So you can see how that chart starts to apply. I really don't know what time it is. 3:30, 4 o'clock? It's actually, it's 5:30 my time, isn't it? It's 2:10. 2:10, yeah. Right on time. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I got a closing slide for you and then a little story I'll share with you. Before I do that, are there any questions you want to ask me at all? I've been clear, crystal clear, and everything. Either that or you're tired or bored or all three. Okay. And now, just to let you know, this isn't suggesting your negotiations go downhill. I created the slide and I thought, maybe that's not sending the right message. But if you think about, kind of summarize the principles we've been talking about today. First, what you want to do, when you're trying to be strategic in negotiations, you want to create an environment that's influential towards your outcomes, right? So, for example, what do most people think of relative to being influential in preparing for negotiations? They think, where are we going to hold it? And the first thing they think is, we're going to have it here, right? I'm going to line up people, we're going to have it here, and they're going to be scared. I'm suggesting to you it might be in your benefit to hold it at their place. You want to mess with their minds, tell them, hey, we're all coming over to your place, right? Now they think they have the upper hand, and you've already started to be influential in your actions, right? What kind of information can you present, and how can you be non-threatening in that information? How can you put stuff forward that it doesn't look like you're holding a position? It doesn't look like you're stuck or aggressive on that position, right? Because you really have to be flexible, and you have to demonstrate that. And are there others who could support your position you could bring into this without it making it look like you're trying to beat up on the other person? If there's somebody else you can bring along, they can make a statement, we can call them on the phone, do it. The second is the strategic approach. You want to think through your negotiations. You want to be strategic, and you want to prepare for those negotiations. What might the other party's points be? What might their minimum and maximum be? What might yours be? What are the gaps between the two? How could you address them? Again, what current data could you bring along to support your position that won't seem threatening to the other party? The third part is build a common frame. Language helps us build a frame, right? The words we say can help bring somebody into our picture or push them away. Depends on how you use language. So you want to present your points using facts and examples, stories, metaphors. Some of the stuff I've told you today, I've told you a story, a true story, but it serves its purpose, right? You can relate to that. Demonstrate how your views are very similar to the other person's. Even if there's a gap, you want to try and show that's a very small gap as much as possible. And you want to be flexible and agile and in the moment in the discussions. And then lastly, don't fear objections. If somebody puts up a barrier, it's a sign of interest. Take it as such. When they put up an objection, make sure you isolate it, understand clearly what their objection or concern, is a better word obviously is, and then you can address what that concern is, whether it be then or at a later date. I want to, so I'll end up, we're going to do a little early, but I was early, so we're all early. Yeah. Okay, everybody's early. I was told to be on time, so I'm going to be early, right? So I want to tell you this, and this is again a true story. It's going to be hard to believe, but I told you I got that role with that HR manager, right? So as soon as I get into that role, what happened within about a month, one of the gentlemen working at this plant said to me, you know, we have a problem. So just to describe what was going on, and I'm going to steal this pen after, they produced bars, right? So steel bars for automotive, and on the bar to identify it, when it would go to an automotive company, you'd put a piece of tape, like masking tape, but a little more complex, stickier, thicker, right? And every tape was a different color, had different barcodes, part numbers, you name it. So they had thousands of these different tapes. So they said to me, Shawn, we need help. The supplier has been providing this stuff since day one for us, but they keep jacking their price up, right? It's got to a point, it's just too expensive. I'm sure there's other stuff out in the market. We want you to take care of this. So I researched the market. I found a great company. And there was one other challenge. This supplier couldn't do accurate barcoding, meaning it couldn't be read well, right, when being scanned. And the customer was saying the stuff has to be scannable. I found a company that not only was competitive, but really could demonstrate clear, scannable tape. So while this was going on, I brought this other supplier in. I introduced myself. Nice to meet you. We had 2 separate discussions, face to face, and I clearly said, your pricing is going, it's too high. We can't deal with it anymore. We're going to have to make a change in business if you don't help. And it was, yeah, no, we've been here all along. You're new. Don't worry. You know, kind of as if I'll figure it out. Now, the piece of the puzzle I won't tell you is this. I was about 27, 26, so it was about 3 years ago. Yeah. The other gentleman, the other company was owned by a gentleman who had just transferred it over to his son, and he was 27, 26. So I think there were some other factors at bear during our negotiations, to be honest with you. But nonetheless, after several negotiations, talking internally to the company, we decided we're moving the business, pulling the business. There was only one problem. For every tape you make, there's a little rubber die that was created that had the imprint on it, and then that die, picture it was put on a cylinder and just circled, and that created the image on the tape as the tape rolled through, right? All those dies were built by this current company and held by this current company. So they were at their facility, just hours away, across the border. I said, okay, well, I looked at the purchase order. That's all we had is a decade-old purchase order, and it said 30 days notice. So I thought, well, I guess I'll go cancel the business. So I got in a van, typed up a letter, drove down to the plant, and the guy was happy. I told him I was coming. Didn't tell him why. Mistake number 2. And I showed up. He says, great, let me take you on a tour. I said, well, if we can just talk. No, come on, Obi. And so it's a smaller company. So he's like, John, this is Shawn. Shawn's our biggest client. And this is Sally, this is Shawn. I'm like, oh, goodness, right? Finish off the tour, go up to his office, sit down. He says, so what brings you here? I said, well, not good news. We've decided to move the business. That's just the way I said it. He said, pardon? I said, I have a letter here. We're giving you 30 days notice. Whatever business you have, we will honor it. You know, we're going to wrap up business. But based on all the discussions we've had, we've decided to move the business. He hit the roof, literally. Jumped up and down, cursing, swearing. Went and called his daddy in another room. So I'm sitting in the upstairs of a facility that I don't even know the city I'm in. I mean, I can tell you where it was, Port Huron, I think. But I'm in this building. People downstairs that know me think I'm here just to see how great things are going. I've just canceled the business. He goes in the next room, calls his father, and I can hear him yelling. He's got his father on speaker, and they're both yelling in the next room because the walls are thin. So I'm thinking, do I run now? Is there a window close? I can't bring a gun, right? So how do I protect myself, right? Luckily for me, he comes back. His father calmed him down. He said, fine, fair enough. You probably came here to get your dies. I said, I did. So he helped me load them up. And that was kind of the end of it, really. The funniest part was, as we went downstairs to get these dies from his office, we passed John, that he had introduced me to earlier. So John, I'll never forget, he's working away, he turns on, oh, hello, Mr. Casemore. And this other guy says, don't talk to him, you just lost your job. I could write a book about how not to negotiate. Anyways, from our experiences is how we learn, right? So nonetheless, to finish off that story, I put them in the back of the van, right? I drove from Port Huron to Ohio, where the new supplier was. It was all in the same day. I got to Ohio, I dropped them off, quick meeting, how you doing, things are good, here's a die, gotta go. It was starving, I hadn't eaten since breakfast time, and this is now 6 o'clock at night. So down the road, this little place in Ohio, I see a Wendy's. I pull in, I drive up, I'm not thinking clearly. I go in, I order what I want. She says it'd be $10, I pull it a Canadian 10, and the girl behind the counter goes, what's this? It says $10, it says $10 Canadian. $10 Canadian, hold on a second. Hey guys, look at this. And she took it and carried it around the back room showing people. I'm not kidding. And then she comes back and she goes, yeah, we don't take this. So I drove back to where I came from without eating at all. That was how my day ended. But nonetheless, here's what I want to tell you. All of those mistakes I made were learning ground, just like you've done the same. And what I did in that case is I made what could have been a solution from a negotiation, I made it a challenge. So the question I leave you with today is, are you making your negotiations a challenge, or are you using them to create solutions? Thank you very much.